You're listening to another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A deep dive into a classic show whose influence is immeasurable. Your next stop? Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast where I review the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology series. For archives of all of my episodes, visit AnthologyPod.com. You can also like the Facebook page at Facebook.com/AnthologyPod and follow me on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod. And if you'd like to support what I do here, you can become a patron at Patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer, where it's a monthly fee that you pay depending on which tier you join. On Patreon, I have tons of exclusive audio content, including exclusive B-roll episodes, TV and book reviews, movie reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and early access to podcast episodes and previously unreleased content. So check that out at patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer. So today on the show, I'm going to be discussing A Quality of Mercy. It's the 15th episode of the Twilight Zone's third season, and it originally aired on December 29th, 1961. And of course, I will be rounding out the episode with a brief review of Science Fiction Theater Season 1, Episode 23, The Strange People at Pecos. The Strange People at Pecos, by the way, is, as of this recording, available on YouTube and also on dailymotion.com. I have a link in the show notes of this episode if you want to watch that episode of Science Fiction Theater. So, before I get into the actual episode and everything, I do have news that pertains to tangentially to the show, basically. As you guys know, I do bonus episode review series, and kind of the start of that was me deciding to review Black Mirror episode by episode. And after 3 years of not having any Black Mirror content, they are underway in making Black Mirror Season 6. I believe I mentioned that in a previous episode, but today, as of this recording, today is July 13th, Wednesday. There was casting announcements. There's no information about the show itself, about Season 6, except for the fact that the season is believed to be longer than Season 5, which Season 5 was 3 episodes, so that's not really a big hurdle to clear. But the casting news that hit today, this cast list runs the gamut of 3 episodes, so obviously more actors are going to sign on for the season because there's going to be more than 3 episodes. But the casting announcements, I'm very excited about a lot of these. So we've got Zazie Beetz, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Papa Esidu, which I haven't seen them in anything that I'm aware of, Josh Hartnett, Aaron Paul, Kate Mara, Danny Ramirez, Clara Rugard, Auden Thornton, and Anjana Vasan. So, like I said, there's no other information except for those names. And it's interesting because Aaron Paul is, of course, best known from Breaking Bad, and he also is currently, I think I stopped after Season 1, but currently on Westworld. And Zazie Beetz is, of course, she was on Monkey Paw Productions' Twilight Zone episode, Blurry Man in Season 1, the Season 1 finale. So that's cool. And yeah, so I'm excited. I'm also really curious and excited about Josh Hartnett being in it because I'm a big fan of his from like the late 90s and everything. So I'm excited for that to come out and for me to review it in a new bonus episode series. So yeah. All right, well, that's really all the news I have. So let me go ahead and dig into A Quality of Mercy. As usual, I'm going to read a plot summary courtesy of The Twilight Zone: Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grahams Jr. And from here on out, I'm going to be spoiling the entirety of A Quality of Mercy. So if you don't want to be spoiled, go check it out. Watch it on Paramount Plus or Physical, wherever you watch it. and then come back and listen to the episode. But spoiler warning has been warned. So here we go with the plot summary of A Quality of Mercy. Since the war isn't going to end before dinner time, Sergeant Casarano and his men wait to see what can happen in a group of worn-out Japanese who are trapped within a cave, unreachable by heavy artillery or heavy weaponry. A bloodthirsty lieutenant named Cattell arrives to take command, ordering the battle-fatigued platoon to prepare to advance on the cave. With no concern or dignity for human life, Lieutenant Cattell believes that the enemy is destined for a killing, regardless of the plea for compassion from Sergeant Casarano. Before the advance can be made, Lieutenant Cattell finds himself misplaced in time. Corregidor, May 1942. He is now a Japanese lieutenant named Yamori and finds himself being ordered about by Captain Nakagawa, a bloodthirsty commander who wants to eliminate the 20 or 30 wounded Americans trapped inside a cave. Yamuri pleads with the captain to have compassion for the wounded Americans, but his pleas are ignored. Returning to the year 1945, Lieutenant Cattell receives news of an atomic bomb dropped on Japan. The new orders are to fall back to see if the war ends in the next couple of days. Cattell, having worn the shoe on the other foot, agrees to fall back without hesitation. Starring as Lieutenant Cattell and Lieutenant Yamuri, is Dean Stockwell. This is his first and only episode of The Twilight Zone. And he also appeared in one episode of Night Gallery in 1973, and one episode of the 1980s Twilight Zone in 1989. He just recently died in November of 2021, and throughout his career, he was nominated for 1 Oscar and received 4 Emmy nominations, as well as 4 Golden Globe nominations and 2 Golden Globe wins. And he's best known as Al in Quantum Leap, another sci-fi show. That also kind of, interestingly enough, takes an anthological kind of format. So, returning for his second of 3 Twilight Zone episodes is Albert Salmi as Sergeant Casarano. He was previously in Execution from Season 1, and the next we'll see from him is in Season 4's episode Of Late I Think of Cliffordville. And also appearing in this episode is Leonard Nimoy as Hansen in a very small role that isn't really much. Of course, he was famous for playing Spock in Star Trek, and this was his only appearance on The Twilight Zone. And rounding out the cast as Sergeant Yamazaki is Dale Ishimoto. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. And so writer for the episode was Rod Serling, and it was based on an idea by Sam Rolfe, which, let me see if I can find the anecdote here, the information. So I'm reading this from Twilight Zone: Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grahams Jr. Here we go. Sam Rolfe, I don't know, the co-creator of Half Gun Will Travel and future producer and co-creator of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., submitted this plot idea to Serling, who made arrangements for the purchase. Rolfe was committed to submitting a script based on his plot proposal, but was unable to do so, but leaving Serling to the task of drafting the teleplay. This was not Rolfe's only intended contribution to the series. One script Rolfe was contracted to deliver was The Calculator, with the first draft due contractually by May 8th, but that was never produced. And I'm not sure if it was never the script was never produced, like he didn't follow the contract, or he didn't deliver on that by May 8th or whatever I said, or if he did deliver on it, but the episode was never completed or never produced. So either or, it was never done. So yeah. Director for this episode was Buzz Kulik, making his 7th of 9 Twilight Zone directorial efforts. Previously, we saw his work in A Game of Pool, and next we'll see is in Season 4 with the episode Jess Bell. So, before I get into my thoughts or my review of the episode, I'm going to share basically what my before watching the episode for the first time. And what I jotted down was, I believe it has something to do with a soldier in World War II, probably written by Serling, which, let's be honest, is just a safe bet because like 90% of the episodes were written by Serling. And I had the idea that it was similar to the Purple Testament, but I wasn't sure in what way. And going into the episode, I had no idea what the quote-unquote Twilight Zone element was. And I was only sort of certain that the phrase equality of mercy came from Shakespeare. So I was right about that. But that's all I knew going in. So let me go ahead and dive into my review of Equality of Mercy. Okay, so the first thing that kind of jumps out in this episode is the timestamp or the date on the screen of August 6, 1945, which I immediately pegged as, oh, that's the day that we dropped the bomb on... I think Hiroshima was the first one, right? That's the day we dropped the A-bomb, which is something that, and this is something I'm sure I've talked about on the podcast before, but that's something that it just boggles my mind to think about. As someone who grew up and kind of came of age entertainment-wise with the likes of, like, in a post 9/11 world, basically. So I was 15 in 2001, and that's kind of when I was kind of cultivating my taste in movies and TV, and in the kind of as I entered high school, or as I was in high school, that's when I kind of became more into television and movies. And a big thing in the aftermath of 9/11 was, terrorist action thrillers. I'm thinking in particular 24. 24 was like my favorite show. And a big part of 24 was the ever-present threat of nuclear war and nuclear bombs. And it was very much a fear scare tactic kind of thing, and very much relied on the fear of the American public and everything to be entertaining and everything. So, having like kind of come of age in that with that kind of entertainment, it just kind of boggles my mind to think that like it's kind of incredible to think that on this planet we are the United States is the only nation to use atomic weaponry, and that is terrifying. And there's always that quote from someone, maybe Einstein? I don't know. Someone who said that the next World War will be fought with nuclear weapons, and then the one after that will be sticks and stones. So anyway, so let's talk about Equality of Mercy. I did find it interesting that it begins with the date of the A-bomb detonation. And I really while I was watching this episode and kind of thinking about it as I was watching it and rewatching it, I really came to respect the show's approach to that subject matter. I really like that the show didn't use the A-bomb as a plot surprise. It isn't like it could have easily been like a shock thing where the end of the episode is like the reveal that, oh, this was August 6, 1945. Like, this is when we dropped the bomb. And that honestly could have been effective as a surprise in the plot line, in the plot. But I respect that it wasn't used for that purpose. It was told to us right up front with the date at the start. So we're told directly that this takes place on that specific day. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of the way that the show handled depicting Dachau. I messed that up too in the episode, but Dachau in Death's Head Revisited. It doesn't shy away from it. It depicts the absolute horror of what happened there and the magnitude of it as well, but does so with the proper respect for the dead, in a sense, and with a proper respect for the magnitude of what happened. And I really appreciate the kind of the softness that the show employs with certain big subjects and topics. So the next thing that I kind of honed in on in this episode after the title card or the date stamp on screen was just how quiet it was. We are kind of panning across this battlefield, and it is very quiet. It is like there are some mortar shells and some explosions in the distance, but it doesn't feel like that full-on like invasion of Normandy style, like D-Day kind of chaos or anything. It is very much like this quiet, very much waning days of war and fatigue-ridden act of fighting in the soundtrack. And I thought that was really interesting, especially because every single actor in this episode, save for Dean Stockwell for obvious reasons, plays their character with this just extreme fatigue and exhaustion. And that level of care in the performance makes it shine through so well. It tells you exactly what the stakes are, what the energy is, what these characters are feeling, having been at war for, at least in this position, for I think one of the characters says 24 months. Of just continuous combat and everything, and you just really get a sense for that, and I think that that's done incredibly well. It's another example of the show just exercising this perfectly economic level of storytelling, really playing up the visual art form of film to just depict exactly what it's intending in terms of the tone and the energy that's taking place. It's really, really really impressive. And then the next thing I obviously caught on was, I put the guy from Execution, Albert Salmi, I think is that the actor's name? Sorry, I just got a message. Okay, yes. So Albert Salmi, I immediately noticed him, and I was very excited because I really liked his like kind of feral, like dangerous energy and Execution. And watching it or watching this episode in contrast to that performance, it's just so kind of refreshing and interesting to see him play such a likable and compassionate character. I know that's the job. Like, he's an actor, he's paid to perform, but I think that these two episodes that I've seen him in, he plays the roles so well that it's really pretty impressive to me. And so as he's kind of talking to the platoon and talking to through the radio to the people sending over the mortar barrages, I was kind of struggling to understand his position on the radio. So I'm going to kind of talk through it and everything. So the platoon are spotters for the mortar barrages at the cave. The Japanese soldiers are holed up in the cave, but none of the mortar firing is actually penetrating the cave. And so I guess what he's saying is that he's frustrated because they're just doing these kind of outside barrages and explosions on the outside of the cave to try to scare them out, but it's clearly not working. They're not doing like anything to actually go after them. It's kind of just in this waiting period, which I think is the case. And if that is the case, if I didn't misread it entirely, I do find it interesting that that's an example of this whole exercise. The platoon's entire duty in this position is to just hold up, wait for them to either come out or die of starvation, as Casarano says. And it gives this idea that this whole exercise has just a sense of uselessness and pointlessness. And I think that that's something that's very astute about the themes of war. And I think partially, I can't really speak exactly to Serling's intention, but it kind of feels like a level of a level of depicting the futility of war, the uselessness of war, the maybe his reaction to like his war experience and everything, which I also found really interesting because obviously this takes place in the Philippines and he was a paratrooper in the Philippines in World War II. So that just gives this episode an extra sense of just personal stakes for Serling. And I really like that he chose to write an episode of the Twilight Zone set in the Philippines, in where the theater of war that he was a participant in, and make the entire episode about compassion on the battlefield and compassion in the face of the end of the war, and basically being about humanity, whether or not a man's humanity will win out well when they have experienced war for an extended period of time, or if a man's bloodlust going into war isn't satisfied, if they can come back from that. So I just love the kind of themes of compassion and kind of mercy that's at the heart of this episode. And so my confusion with Casarano on the radio was, it kind of came in from him asking why they can't just fire into the cave. And again, I'm not 100% sure, because his whole position is like, okay, they're defeated, they're done, why are we even bothering? But he's also asking, like, what is there something against your religion about not firing into the cave? And I feel like he's pointing out how useless the whole thing is, and it's like they're just going through the paces of it, and everyone knows that the war is nearing the end. But I'm kind of curious, like, why is that his sticking point? Why is his sticking point to take the position that, they're just firing on the outside of it? Why not just put them out of their misery and fire into it, or whatever? Which kind of seems, I don't know, kind of counterintuitive to his position in the rest of the episode, but also, I don't know, I probably just misread it or something. So they determine that they're going to keep firing at the cave to try to smoke them out, and if that doesn't work, they're going to just bypass them. That's what Casarano kind of says to the group. That's the idea. And then that's when we kind of get, we're coming up on the opening narration, but before that, I just want to say, like, this prologue, this opening sequence is an incredible look at the end of the war through, as the opening narration says, dulled and tired eyes. And Casarano, as he's talking to the platoon, says that he doesn't have any big yen to go in and fight at this stage of the game. And that's just, I don't know, again, the fatigue among the group is so consistent, constant, and visceral that it just really gives the sense that they've been at it for a very long time. And you just have this kind of blank, or not blank or vacant, but this kind of distant way that Salmi kind of delivers his lines, that he's, like he says, like, I don't have any big yen to go in and fight at this stage of the game. Also, I think the dialogue is absolutely amazing in this. Absolutely great. So, but like the just kind of vacant or distant way that he says these, it just really hammers home that whole idea that, yeah, they're done. This is over. We're not getting any extra points in overtime. Like they're done. And it's so clearly present throughout this entire prologue, which is what makes Catel's entrance into the episode kind of shake things up, and really delves into the storyline as it progresses through the actual meat of the episode. So by the way, I'm sorry, I think I might be coming down with a cold, so forgive me if I have to clear my throat. But anyway, at this point, before the opening narration, Casarano says that the infantrymen may be called in to take them out. But again, he recognizes how futile it all is. And he says that the Japanese have already lost Okinawa and a few other places. And he says that the soldiers in the cave are tired and defeated, but don't know when to quit. And then I really like this line where he says, there's no one in that cave to tell them the war is over for them. And that, I don't know, something about that just really kind of hit home with me. Maybe not hit home with me, but it just feels like it's kind of counter to what, American media depicts, the Japanese army of World War II as. Like, they are kamikaze pilots and bonsai infantrymen that are just like will come out of nowhere and like kill soldiers with bayonets and everything. It's just this merciless thing, and it's really interesting that like American media kind of depicts the Japanese soldiers of World War II in that case, but here we have an episode that is depicting the Japanese soldiers as fatigued, done, and defeated, and still like they're just waiting. And that's something that I found really interesting as well, is that we never see the ones in the cave. We never see the soldiers in the cave. We only have dialogue to tell us about those characters, those defeated Japanese characters. And I think that the compassion that's shown in this episode goes a very long way, because we don't even see the Japanese soldiers that they're referencing, and we still feel this level of compassion. So the scene kind of ends with Caserano saying that they are, like, he refers to them as poor guys as he's like lifting up the binoculars and looking. And I don't know. So like the way that he's showing compassion for the enemy shows that the war itself hasn't dehumanized Caserano, which is great. And it honestly makes me really like and respect the character. And here's something that I'm going to be referencing throughout this review here and there, but I'm very curious if Spielberg and the writers of Saving Private Ryan used this particular episode of the Twilight Zone as a inspiration for Saving Private Ryan, because I see a lot of Tom Hanks's character Captain Miller in Saving Private Ryan in Sergeant Caserano. He's kind of the leader of this group, this platoon that's done and ready to they're tired and everything. And Captain Miller in Saving Private Ryan is the commander of a group that has to go into behind enemy lines to rescue Private Ryan, specifically to get him home so that he can be with his mother, who just lost the rest of her sons. Like that movie is incredible, but it also has this level of futility to it. Like, okay, is it really a good allocation of resources for them to fish out this guy so that he can go home while the war is still raging? Like, is it a better allocation of their resources to put them in the battlefield and everything? So I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I do wonder if Saving Private Ryan drew any inspiration from Equality of Mercy. I would think so, but I don't have any concrete proof. But anyway, we then get the opening narration, courtesy of Rod Serling, which I will play right now.
It's August 1945. The last grimy pages of a dirty, torn book of war. The place is the Philippine Islands. The men are what's left of a platoon of American infantry, whose dulled and tired eyes, set deep in dulled and tired faces, can now look toward America. That moment when the nightmare appears to be coming to an end. But they've got one more battle to fight. And in a moment, we'll observe that battle. August 1945, Philippine Islands. But in reality, it's high noon in the Twilight Zone.
So I really like how vague this opening narration is. At the time when I first watched this episode, I still had no idea what to expect, like none whatsoever. I didn't even know that there was going to be a new character introduced after the opening narration. And again, I do just found it to be really interesting that it takes place in the Philippines, where Serling fought in World War II, and it just, like I said, it makes it feel like a more personal story. Just for trivia's sake, it was, I believe, filmed at the Hal Roach Studios backlot. So, following the opening narration, we have the arrival of Lieutenant Cattell, and just right off the bat, we see that he is in stark contrast to the platoon. He's very sharply focused, and he moves with that kind of programmed energy of someone who hasn't had to improvise in a real battle, like someone who still has that basic training kind of drilled into him, who hasn't had to kind of attune that structure to an improvised like battlefield, like an actual battlefield. And so he kind of still has that fresh energy from basic training. And so just right off the bat, we kind of peg him as that. And Casarano gives him an overview of what's going on, and Cattell immediately just wants to go into the cave and kill the remaining Japanese soldiers. And right from the start, that already makes for a pretty intense episode. Like, something that I found really interesting, I kind of had to wrestle with when rewatching it, is that it's a full, this episode runs the full, 50% of its runtime, which is just a very awkward way of saying halfway through the episode is when the Twilight Zone element presents itself. We have an entire half of the episode just basically depicting, war in these characters in a very normal, kind of dramatic episode that is free of science fiction. And I find that to be pretty interesting. And it's something, like I said, I had to wrestle with, and I kind of came out appreciating it because it is such a serious subject matter and such a serious theme to be kind of delving into, that we need that. We don't need an extended science fiction element when we have something as serious as, people in war, to kind of contend with. So, as Cattell is talking to other members of the platoon, he addresses Watkins, who's lying down, and he just kind of takes him to task. And again, Dean Stockwell does an incredible job of playing that just very militaristic, but not as threatening kind of authority figure, someone who is in a position of authority but has no authority behind them. So they are just lying back, or they are relying on the energy that they're bringing out, that military cadence and the way that they're constantly standing at attention. It's that just really, in addition to being this show of bravado in an empty suit, in an empty uniform, really, in addition to that, his energy brings the energy that he brings to the role really highlights just how tired and done with the war the platoon is, and how they are completely different. They are in completely different circumstances, Cattell and the platoon. And Casarano says that they've been in the line for 33 days and haven't had much sleep. And Cattell just kind of dismisses it. It's well, I'm sorry, or you have my sympathy, but we're at a war, and when we're in a war, we kill everyone, and blah, blah, blah. And at this point, this is another Saving Private Ryan reference I'm going to make, but it is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's an incredible movie. But anyway, Cattell is this fresh face and eager to make a name for himself officer. And he reminds me a lot of Jeremy Davies' character in Saving Private Ryan. He played Corporal Upham, who is kind of he is conscripted onto the group going after Private Ryan because he can speak German, and he can speak a couple other languages too. So he's kind of a translator, and he is someone who has not seen combat. He has not seen actual combat, so he's in stark contrast with the rest of the group. And I have to believe that Spielberg and the writers of Saving Private Ryan had to have drawn inspiration from this episode. But anyway, Casarano, after giving him the rundown, and after Cattell has kind of taken some of the members of the platoon to task, Casarano asks what Cattell's orders are, and he says that he wants to go into the cave and take out the Japanese. And then he asks for Casarano's opinion, and his first thing, this is such an interesting, it's an interesting scene depicting the power dynamic between the two men, between the sergeant and the lieutenant, because Casarano just says very casually, or very with this sense of semi-authority, or at least experience. That's what he's saying it with. But he says, well, first off, you got to take off your officer markings and insignia so the Japanese don't kill you and everything. And like they had talked about how they had lost 3 lieutenants, and he says that that's how they're going to like the Japanese are relentless and they're going to go after him if he's waving around and giving orders and everything. And it just really illustrates not only how out of his element Cattell is, but how battle-hardened the platoon is. It is just this very much, and again, it's that kind of distant way that Salmi delivers the dialogue, but it's this kind of like matter-of-fact, like, okay, well, you got to do this because of this. And it's just very, like, no nonsense, just very much straight to the point. And it's just so straightforward. And Cattell asks him for his opinion, so Cassarano says that the war isn't going to end before dinner time, so he thinks that they should wait it out and maybe eventually they'll have to go in, but not now. And that is kind of a summation or a it's like the summation of their dynamic in this episode. He says that there's no point in going in, and Cattell just wants to go in to get his hands dirty. He wants to kill Japanese soldiers. And it's not really for bloodlust so much as it is for stature and his own pride and ego and everything, which is something that they talk about in the episode, and I think they do a really great job. Again, the dialogue in this episode is incredible. And then we get Cassarano's kind of first dig at Cattell, in that he asks how long Cattell has been in the war. And you can see, like, the way Dean Stockwell plays this is so great. But his reaction is like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, he's very defensive, and he's immediately like kind of, it gets a rise out of him a little bit. And Cassarano says, well, I asked because you're calling this like a football game. And he says, you have to remember, Lieutenant, you haven't been shot at yet, and you haven't shot anybody yet either. And like, there's just something to be said about the disconnect between human emotions and the military itself. I don't want to go on like a tangent about the military industrial complex and all of this stuff, but it's just really interesting to me how just the kind of the whole presence and idea of like the military itself is to break down individuals so that they can be compliant with and obedient to orders. And that's how the military functions. Like, that's not really it's not me criticizing or anything. It's just the way it is. Like, the military just molds its soldiers into, it actually reminds me of a Simpsons quote, where it's like, there's a facility just outside of Springfield that's molding murderous kill bots or something. It's called the Army or something like that. I don't remember. But anyway, so yeah, I just really like how Cassarano, in a kind of respectful but also not very respectful way, takes Cattell to task and just lightly like explains to him like you are out of your element, and this is what we're dealing with and everything. So I just really appreciate the power dynamic in this episode between the two characters. And so after that, Cattell, having been kind of taken to task a little bit, and his ego is a little bruised, he tries to reassert his authority by demanding clean weapons in the platoon, and he's trying to find authority or trying to be authoritative wherever he can. And that just really plays up this insecurity of Cattell and how he wants to prove himself for himself, not for the platoon. Like, he wants to prove himself so that his ego can stay in check and his pride isn't hurt by his ineffectual experience in World War II. And that character dynamic, that character trait, those character flaws are what make him an incredibly dangerous individual and very... he's kind of this threat to the platoon and everything. And it's not depicted as like he's not the antagonist. Well, he is the antagonist, but he's not like he's not depicted as an evil character. He's depicted as this very insecure character. And I think that provides a richness to the storytelling that that a lesser writer would have kind of overlooked in writing an episode like this. So Watkins then kind of gives Cattell kind of follows Casarano's kind of lead in Casarana, his lead by kind of taking Cattell to task a little bit. Because Cattell kind of had this outburst where he's like, I'm going to demand clean weapons. And when if I say that we're going to go in and kill some Japanese soldiers, we're going to kill some Japs. And so Watkins kind of gets up and he says that they've got 24 months on Cattell. Like, they've been at this 24 months more than Cattell is. And he says that we've seen enough death to last us a lifetime and then some, which that just feels just so like authentic and true. And he then kind of appeases Cattell in a sense. He kind of I don't know. He kind of appeases him in a sense, because he says, if you've got a big yen to do some killing, okay, we'll do some killing for you, but don't ask us to stand up and cheer about it. And that is just such an elegant way to demonstrate the completely opposing perspectives of the platoon versus Cattell, his perspective on the war and everything. And it's another thing. So when I talked about how Cattell is kind of comporting himself, I think that's the word. So he's carrying himself as this authoritative figure. He is very much kind of a product of the military, basic training, kind of beaten into shape kind of thing. But in contrast to that, the platoon itself is very interesting, as it's depicted as the singular unit. So when one person speaks to Cattell or speaks to the situation at hand, you can tell that it is on behalf of the entire platoon. Like, the entire unit is functioning as one singular unit. And I think that that's really interesting and a really smart way to write these characters and this situation. And of course, I mean, Serling, I'm sure he drew from his real life experience and everything, but it's incredibly smart writing, in my opinion. So we get kind of a break to a new scene. It's nightfall and they're preparing for the attack. It's very the movements of them as they're kind of like putting mud on their faces and kind of checking their weapons and everything. It's very routine. It's very procedural. It's very methodical is the word I meant. It's very methodical. It's very routine, but it still has that exhaustion underpinning it. And I think that's really well done visual storytelling. So Cattell then calls for Casarana. And they start making their plans for attack, and Cattell is still set on the attack. And I love this. This sequence is really, really great, because Casarana suggests that they skip the cave, and this scene reminded me a lot of a later scene in Saving Private Ryan. When they come across a machine gun nest, and they debate skipping the machine gun nest. They debate just skipping it and moving along, and they get into this big argument over whether they should divert from their duties to go after this machine gun nest, or they should move on and let some other unit take care of it. It's really, I love Saving Private Ryan, you guys. So I really wonder if this element of the Twilight Zone in this episode of Casarana suggesting that they skip the cave bore any influence on the writing of Saving Private Ryan. And I believe that that's going to be my last reference to Saving Private Ryan, but God, I love that movie so much. So anyway, Cattell then kind of levels with Casarana a little bit and says, "I'm not your cup of tea, am I, Sergeant?" And again, the dialogue is just so great. I love the dialogue in this episode because Casarana's response is, "Well, you got a bit too much vinegar for my liking," and so then I think that's when he suggests that they bypass the cave, and he explains to Cattell that the Japanese soldiers are tired and defeated, and they're defeated. There's no point in going after them and killing them while they're, the war is basically over. And Cattell's response is, "But they're Japs." And Casarana just volleys right back to him and is like, "They're men." And this is such a key difference between the two men. And it's kind of the theme of the episode itself. This idea that one man is looking at a group of human beings as the enemy, singularly depicted as the enemy, while another man is realizing that the war is over for them. These are the last days of the war. It's brutal. It's cruel. It's unnecessary to go and kill people while they are likely days or moments away from being defeated anyway. And so it's just really interesting because, again, and I keep kind of coming back to this, but the idea that that war and the military kind of hammers into the people fighting them, that they cannot be human to function as soldiers. And it's such an interesting kind of theoretical or like an interesting theme to explore. That's the word. So then Cattell, again, super insecure and very ego-driven and everything. He suggests that Casarana is tired. He's either tired or he's chicken. And Casarana just levels with him. He's like, "Probably both." And then he starts to say something like, he says, "Yeah, and if I have to size you up," and then he stops because, again, it's that kind of like underground or under the surface military etiquette that he's addressing an officer, so he can't say it. So then, because he's an officer and command is command, but Cattell is like, "No, go ahead. How do you size me up?" And again, I've got to say, the dialogue, incredible. Casarana says, "You're a pea green shaved tail fresh from some campus, afraid you won't bag your limit, or worse, all shook up because someone may spot you as a Johnny-come-lately instead of a killer of men." Just like that dialogue, that is poetry. That is so amazing, and the way that Salmi delivers that in this scene is just absolutely great. It's this matter-of-fact way that isn't an intimidation thing. It's not, he stands nothing really to gain except to put this man in his place, to keep him from putting his men in harm's way and just needlessly killing other human beings. It's just great. I love the dialogue there, and I love the performance. And like, even after that, like, Cattell is kind of shook by that, and he kind of starts to stop Casarana. And I have all the respect in the world for this character. Casarana says, "No, you asked me, Lieutenant, and you're going to get it." And he says, "You want to prove your manhood, but it's a little late in the day, and there aren't many chances left as to how to do it. So it all boils down to that pitiful cave with sick, half-dead losers and a platoon full of tired men." That's paraphrased, I think, but basically that's what he says. And I'm just like it's so astounding to me because it is just laying out the themes and the morals of this episode just clear as day in such an elegant and kind of poetically written way. And I just love it. I absolutely love it. And so Cattell, the endlessly insecure, pride-driven, ego-driven lieutenant, says that Casarana is a lousy soldier, and he calls into question the entire platoon's resolve for war. And he does it in this defensive way. Like he's shielding his insecurities after being called out on those insecurities by someone who he asked to size him up. and he's lashing out in just typical fashion of someone whose ego is severely bruised and very insecure. And it is so beautifully written and wonderful. And Cattell kind of gets like this, he gets very, very aggressive with it. He says that he'd see every enemy die, whether it's the first day of the war or the last day of the war. And if he had his pleasure, he would see every single Japanese soldier die. And it's just, it shows him as this bloodthirsty person, but really under the surface, he is an incredibly ego-driven, prideful, insecure person. That is Lieutenant Cattell to a T. And so now we're at around the halfway point of the episode, and that's when the binoculars drop and the lieutenant switches places with the Japanese platoon, which is pretty similar to Judgment Night from season 1. But what I found interesting as well is that he not only changes places with a Japanese soldier, but he changes places. He changes place and time, in place. So he's still in that same position, but he's in 1942, May 4th, 1942. So that was, to be honest, that was slightly confusing. And I will go ahead and say this right up front. The second half of the episode is not nearly as good for me as that first half was, which is so interesting to me because the thing that I love about the Twilight Zone is the way it uses science fiction in order to tell its stories and in order to depict its morals and the themes and the lessons and everything in the sci-fi format. But what's interesting to me is that the show did such a great job. This episode did such a solid and great job of depicting the drama in that first half that I could have been fine with it being like a completely not science fiction episode. Like it could have played out as straightforward as possible, like The Silence, and I would have loved it. But anyway, I will say that when we do get the swap and we get the reveal that he's displaced in time to May 4th, 1942, that was slightly confusing. Like I had expected a more direct swap in places. Like I thought that when he picked up the binoculars and we see him as a Japanese soldier, I thought he was going to be in the cave. But it's an intriguing change to have him displaced in time and in the same place, because he's transported to a time when a Japanese platoon had the same upper hand that the Americans did. So it is fine. It's interesting. It's where he gets the kind of shoe on the other foot kind of thing, or walk a mile in someone else's shoes kind of parable or fable or whatever story. So Cattell has now changed into Lieutenant Yamuri. And he's in Casarano. I think I've in my notes I have him as Casarano and Casarano. Anyway, so Casarano's position on the Japanese side, and so he is now in the position to show mercy for the Americans. And also, I have to say, like, I know I'm watching this in 2022. This aired in 1961. I kind of wondered, is Dean Stockwell technically in yellowface? Like, is this technically like I don't know. I mean, he's speaking English, so it's not like an offensive thing. And if it is, it's a different time. It's whatever. It's probably not even worth mentioning on a podcast. But I do think it's interesting that they did change his look considerably for the role. And as much as I kind of as much as I kind of struggled with this part of the episode in terms of connecting with his confusion or his swapping in place, because I wanted more of the debate from Casarano and Cattell. I wanted more of that because it is so rich with dialogue and themes and everything. But even with my struggle with that, I felt like Cattell as Yamuri, his confusion is pretty solid. But again, like the but coming off of such an intense first half of the episode, it makes that kind of confusion, that like, oh, where am I? When am I? Kind of thing, a little bit tired. And it kind of seems like a little bit of a downturn for the episode that was built up so well in that first half. So seeing, having Cattell see the threat against Americans instead of the Japanese also plays into that kind of singular dehumanizing nature of war / being in the military. Because the only way for him to show compassion and mercy for human beings is to see them as Americans instead of, and that is kind of indicative of, the military industrial complex thing that I kind of touched on in the earlier in the podcast, because it's just seeing people as what they are, like as what they are told that they are. Like, oh, this is a Japanese soldier, he is the enemy, we need to kill this person no matter what stage of the war we're in or anything. Like, we need to kill these people. And so the Twilight Zone has created a circumstance in which Cattell is now experiencing that as seeing that position from the opposite end. And it's, I don't know. I think that this episode kind of, I don't want to say it falls apart for me, but it doesn't land as hard for me because of that first half being so well done. Because what this episode says is that it's also not really that clear of a swap, really, because this is May 4th, 1942. And so, like, there's plenty of war going on. There's plenty of, there's like 3 more years of war to be fought. So at that stage in the war, they are still fighting. It's still heavily fought war in that theater of war in World War II. So having Cattell kind of see that, oh, they need to be compassionate about the soldiers holed up in Cattell as Yamuri, trying to convince them that they need to show compassion because the Americans are defeated and everything, kind of rings a little bit false, because at that point, like, the Americans aren't defeated. Like, there's still plenty of war to be fought and everything. So I don't know. It kind of loses a little bit of its luster for me a little bit. But anyway, so he argues against going into the cave and tries to fight back and everything, and ends up getting just kind of slapped across the face, like, very, very abruptly. And I thought that this was an interesting in theory scene, because the Japanese captain or the Japanese sergeant or whatever, or Japanese lieutenant, I guess, speaks verbatim the words that Cattell spoke to Casarano in the first half of the episode, saying that I'll kill everyone, like, whether it's the first day of the war or the last day of the war, the enemy is the enemy. And I like when the Twilight Zone does that. I love when the Twilight Zone does that, kind of just reuses lines from earlier in the episode in a different context or with a different inflection. But I've got to say, it's not nearly as effective in this episode as it was in The Obsolete Man in season 2. So it doesn't really come across as that strong as a statement for me. And mostly, that's also mostly due to the fact that I just didn't really care for the swap. I didn't really care for this stage of the episode. I didn't really care for the actual sci-fi element of the episode, because I was just so taken with the first part, the first half of the episode, that and I'm so shocked to hear myself say this out loud, but I just wasn't that into the science fiction of this episode. I was just more into the straight drama of the war in the first half. So yeah, I don't know. So then Cattell is transported back to August 6, 1945. And at that moment, I thought, oh, he's going to call off the attack and happy ending and everything. But before he can even call off the attack, that's when they get the report that the A-bomb was dropped and the unit is to be pulled back. And they're going to wait a few days and hopefully the war will end after after, the Japanese, realized that they were, that an atomic bomb was dropped on them. And so we get this kind of close-up of Dean Stockwell watching the cave in kind of the stunned silence. And Casterano asks, like, what's up? Is something up? And he says, yeah, something. And I really like this because Casterano says he kind of takes the position that he thinks that he's stunned because he thinks that Cattell is upset that he doesn't get to go kill anyone. And what he says, I didn't write it down exactly, but he says, don't worry, I think I actually have it in the closing narration clip, but anyway, he says, like, don't worry, there's going to be other caves, other men, other wars that you can get your killing done. And then that last scene is just Cattell saying, like, dear God, I hope not, like, please, no, I don't want that anymore. And I really like that. I think that it ended well, even if the kind of science fiction element of it didn't really play that well for me. But anyway, after that, we get the closing narration, which I will play right now.
Well, I wouldn't fret. There'll be other caves, other wars, other human beings you can knock off.
I hope not. God help us, I hope not.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice. But applicable to any moment in time, to any group of soldiery, to any nation on the face of the earth, or, as in this case, to the Twilight Zone.
So that's a good closing narration, a good summation of the morals and the kind of point of the episode. And so my kind of closing thoughts on the episode is that, honestly, it kind of feels a little light to me. The episode wears its moral on its sleeve, and which is fine in that first half, but the Twilight Zone element of it, the science fiction element of this episode, just isn't as strong as it could have been. And it isn't as strong as the dramatic narrative in that first half of the episode. So it's kind of a situation where the episode creates so much goodwill and so much tension in that first half, only to kind of just not. I don't want to say it's not like squandering it or anything. It doesn't ruin it or anything. It's still a good episode, but by introducing the science fiction element and then bringing us into Cattell's confusion and everything, only to have him kind of have scenes repeated and everything, does kind of take away from the tension that mounted in the first half of the episode. So yeah, but it's not as strong as it could be, and maybe that's the point. Or maybe it's kind of by design, because I think that the subject is so strong and important. Like the kind of the theme of like humanity of people, like the humanity and loss thereof in war, is the focal point of the episode, instead of the science fiction element, instead of it being about, oh, he swaps places with the Japanese. I think maybe that could be by design, or maybe I'm giving a little bit too much benefit of the doubt to the episode, but at the end of the day, I really, really liked that first half. That first half is incredibly well written, incredibly well performed. The set design, the performances all around are incredible. And, yeah, so I absolutely love that. I just was a little bit not that interested in the second half, which is weird to me. It's still so weird to me. But anyway, those are my thoughts on A Quality of Mercy. Let me know what you thought about this episode. And I do have a couple of pieces of trivia. One is that this is kind of dark and everything, but this episode was one of 4 episodes to be remade for Twilight Zone the movie in 1983. And apparently, because I haven't seen that movie, of course, it's only loosely remade in this instance, and it was directed by John Landis. And of course, I believe that is the segment where the tragedy with Vic Morrow and the 2 young child actors occurred. And then, so this was my next piece of trivia is that this was Dean Stockwell's only appearance on the Twilight Zone. However, he had to drop out of being in the Purple Testament in 1960 in season 1, or season 2. I think season 1. Anyway, yeah, season 1. Which is really interesting because these episodes share they share a lot in common. And so I just found that to be interesting. Yeah. So, but anyway, he had to drop out of the Purple Testament due to scheduling conflicts. So that's pretty interesting. Those are all the pieces of trivia I have for A Quality of Mercy. I would say I probably prefer the Purple Testament to this episode. Maybe, I don't know. I'd have to revisit the Purple Testament, but it is a very well crafted episode, even if I wasn't too keen on the second half of it. So, of course, let me know what you thought of A Quality of Mercy. And as usual, I am going to close out this episode with a brief non-spoiler review of an episode of Science Fiction Theater. This one is Season 1, Episode 23, The Strange People at Pecos. So I'm going to go into that right now. And episode 23 from Science Fiction Theater's first season is titled The Strange People at Pecos. It originally aired on October 1st, 1955, and the plot summary is: a high-strung radar operator is convinced that UFOs are following the test rockets he monitors at a secret facility in Pecos, New Mexico. His kid's new playmate, an odd little girl who feels no pain, causes him to jump to conclusions. He's sure the child and her family are spies from outer space. This episode was directed by Eddie Davis and written by Doris Gilbert and stars Arthur Franz, Doris Dowling, Barry Frohner, Andrew Glick, and Dabs Greer. So I'm going to go into my non-spoiler thoughts as I wind down this episode of Anthology. The pre-show segment with host Truman Bradley had this really interesting, not vaguely interesting, kind of experiment or thought experiment where he talks about how 50 years ago we could travel. It would take a lot to travel from one distance to the other, and now, that's what it was. 50 years ago, we couldn't have fathomed sending sound into outer space or sending frequencies out into outer space, but now science can do that. And the kind of idea is, what about sending? Maybe in 50 years we'll find a way to send matter across space. And he explains that that's what teleportation is. This crazy idea is teleportation. And then he brings us into the episode. And the episode itself is pretty solid, kind of similar to A Visit from Dr. Pliny from last week. This episode deals with some interesting kind of social commentary and the folly of humanity in when they are encountered by or feel like they are in the presence of intelligent beings from, the other from outer space. It's not done with as deft a hand as the Twilight Zone would be, of course, but it's done pretty well. It's done solidly enough. The kind of central drama that's depicted in it and mystery kind of arises from the new neighbor's little girl, comes over to play with the main character's kids. And they're playing baseball. She asks like, "Oh, well, you can, why don't you move the ball with your mind and everything?" And she's depicted as kind of a strange, kind of odd little girl. And I've got to say, this, there was one line that, so when the scientist at the center of the story, when he asks like, "Where are you from, little girl?" and she says, "Oh, I'm from the third planet from the sun." He's like, "What? Why is she saying it like that? Like, what? Why is she saying why say that?" And because of these like flying saucers or these unidentified flying objects that are showing up on his readouts when they're testing this rocket, he jumps to the conclusion that she is from outer space. And there's a moment, not to spoil the episode, but there's a moment where he's piecing information together, and he's like, "Well, why did she say that she's from the third planet from the sun?" And then someone points out to him that that's Earth, and this man, who is a scientist in the show, says, "Mercury, Venus, Earth. She's from Earth." I was just like, okay, come on. I am usually I feel like I've really gotten to the point where I can forgive dated media, and I can forgive some aspects of, movies and TV from the past because it's of an era and everything. It's a time capsule. But that is really silly. That is incredibly silly writing. But what makes up for that is the way that the kids are written. So the two young boys of the scientist in the episode, they are very obnoxious, very annoying, and they bully the little girl very, very harshly. They scream at her. They say that she's a freak and that she's a Martian and she doesn't belong here and she needs to go back to her home planet. All of this stems from her getting hit by a car and not feeling any pain from it, and then walking home, which kind of comes into play later. It's she has a medical condition, or she's from outer space. Who knows? You'll have to see the episode because I'm trying not to spoil it, and I'm trying to really make up for the fact that I basically did just spoil it. But anyway, they are very, very they are harassing her and everything, and it feels like it's very much of a time of the era. It feels like it is. It feels like it is a reference to, the Red Scare and everything of the time, and different prejudices that were, very much fashionable at the time. So maybe there is some social commentary there, but obviously it's not as well drawn as it is in the Twilight Zone. But I commend them for going for that and going for it. Another thing that I really liked about this episode, for a couple of things. One, and this isn't anything necessarily about the actual production of the episode, but in my DVD collection, the complete series of science fiction theater, which I've said before, unfortunately that set is discontinued and out of print. But I'm glad that I have it. It just sucks that other people can't get it. But when you go to the menu and you play an episode, it says, or when you load up each disc, it says the following episodes were mastered from the best available sources. So obviously this is an old TV show. This is an old show that likely wasn't archived properly. The negatives weren't. They're working from negatives. If they are even working from the original negatives, they're working from some source that is not the best. And I've got to say, this episode in particular, is maybe of the whole set, and they're not unwatchable, by the way. They're by no accounts are they unwatchable. Like, the sound is there, the you can clearly see everything. Like, it's a respectable transfer. It's just obviously not high def or anything, but I would wager a guess that it looks better than it did in 1955 on television. So there is that. But this episode does look like the cleanest in terms of the negative and the actual video quality. And I'm really happy to say that, because for a kind of nice change of pace, there's a decent amount of scenes in this episode that actually take place outside. And I say that in such a way, I say that as someone surprised by it, because so much of the show up to this point has been like in offices, indoors, on a soundstage, interior scenes that are clearly the exact same. Like, they don't do much to change the set design or anything. So it was really refreshing to see these scenes play out outside, like kids playing with a baseball, and kids like looking into people's windows and everything. It was really nice. It was good. It was good video quality, and a good kind of refreshing thing. And it really kind of made me feel like appreciate the show a bit. And I kind of hope that there's more variety in that respect going forward. But overall, I would say that A Visit from Dr. Pliny was probably the better episode, because I really did enjoy that episode last week. But this is a respectable kind of follow-up for that. Not that they're connected in any way, but it's a respectable addition to the show. Yeah, and it ends in such a way that it kind of has this kind of silly, like, it is trying to tell this moral at the center of it, and it's trying to tell this very distinctive, like, impart this lesson at the end, which is great. It's awesome. It's fantastic. But then it kind of ends in a way that's like, but also, what if? Like, what if this is really what's going on? It kind of, that undercuts any kind of social commentary that it could have been making. But I mean, I can't really complain, because I was actually pretty impressed with this episode, even though the kids that, in particular, the kids that played the scientists' children were, the acting was not good. It was really, like, they are playing obnoxious children. Like, by design, they are obnoxious, but it's like they take it to 11, and it's very much like, okay, maybe coach them a little bit and do like another, maybe one extra take before you call it a day. But they didn't, and what we got is only passable. So those are my thoughts on The Strange People at Pecos. Let me know what you thought of this episode, and if you watch science fiction theater. Like I said earlier in the episode, someone out there on the YouTubes has uploaded the episodes to YouTube. So right now, they're still available on YouTube. So go seek them out, but a lot of them are available on dailymotion.com. Really, all you need to do is just Google science fiction theater and the episode title, and the video should pop up, or a link to the video should pop up, or just check the show notes of this episode or any episode. And I should have a hopefully still good link to the video. But yeah, as always, I'm like, I really feel like I kind of feel like I'm kind of shouting into the void about this show, but it also, I have this feeling that I don't want it to be lost to time. And it's such a bummer that the DVD is discontinued and everything, because I want people to see this show. I want people to watch this show, because it is a precursor in certain respects to the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits and even Black Mirror and everything. Also, it's George McFly's favorite show. So, which, by the way, we're coming up on the episode soon enough, here in probably like 8 weeks or so. We're coming up on the episode that, or no, probably like 6 weeks. We're coming up on the episode that was aired the night of the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. So anyway, I'll talk about that like an idiot when I get to it. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, please, if you listen to the show and you haven't checked out science fiction theater, I do recommend going and watching it, just because if you're listening to this, if you like the Twilight Zone, if you like science fiction, this vintage science fiction show is definitely worth your time. So, that will just about do it for this episode of Anthology. I do want to apologize that this is coming out a couple of days later than I intended. I've been trying to hit releases on Wednesdays for Anthology, but I just kind of didn't get it. It came down to I'm recording this Wednesday, I'm posting it Friday. Last night, I was prepared to record this episode, but it would have kept me awake past like 1 a.m. And I was just like, I just can't. I can't in good conscience do that. But anyway, so it's out now and everything. I will say that if you join Patreon at any level, you'll get early access to episodes of this Tower Junkies and The Obsessive Viewer. So I'm recording this Wednesday night. Patreon got access to it Thursday morning, and the rest of the world gets access to it Friday. So anyway, consider checking out Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. At the $5 and above levels, I've been doing what I'm dubbing sci-fi duos, like double features of just me talking about science fiction movies. So last week, to pair it with my review of, oh God, what was that episode? 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, I did a double feature review of, oh God, what was it? Identity and, Identity and Cube from 1997. Cube was a science fiction movie that was inspired by 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, and Identity kind of has a similar type of storyline that's about, people trapped in a place and not able to get out. So I did a little like double feature review of both of those to kind of complement that. This episode, or this week, I did what I'm calling Patreon Potpourri, sci-fi duos, of the 2 new release sci-fi movies, Duel from Riley Stearns and After Yang, which, After Yang, I will say, is the first new release movie of 2022 that I rated 5 stars out of 5. So consider checking out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. If you want to get those reviews, sign up at the $5 and above levels. $5 gets you all of that, plus book reviews, movie reactions, B-roll episodes, early access to content, all of that stuff. So anyway, check that out. I'm going to start playing myself out. So yeah, I just want to say once again, thank you guys so much for listening, and hope you guys are having a very nice and safe summer. And I'll be back hopefully next week. I've been doing good about being weekly on this, but next week with Nothing in the Dark. And until then, I want to just say thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next episode. And now, here's a short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. To hear the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. And so I'm kind of coming to Severance with that idea, those ideas kind of fresh in my mind. And it's so interesting the way that it is dealing with that type of kind of disconnect between work and home life. Like the kind of the big thing about the show is that bifurcation, the delineation between the memories of the person at home and the memories of the person at work. And I find it to be such an interesting introduction to that concept, because we are slowly brought into it when he is...
This podcast was edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find links to all of our shows at obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. For exclusive bonus content, including reviews, commentaries, and B-roll episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.